This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Joss Bigmore, who is the leader of Residents for Guildford and Villages at Guildford Borough Council. And this is one of the series of interviews with leaders of the political groups at Guildford Borough Council. And we're set to interview all the leaders with the exception of Julia McShane of the Liberal Democrats, who has not responded to our invitation to interview. Now, Joss, thank you for joining the Guildford Dragon. Obviously, you're quite used to our interviews by now.
Yeah, I think we've done a few.
We've done a few. So let's get straight into it. In May, your party lost seats at the GBC election. You were reduced from 15 in 2019 to only 7. What lessons have you learned from that campaign?
Just how brutal politics can be, and sometimes you don't get what you deserve, I think is the reflections.
Some people might say you did get what you deserve.
Oh, and they can obviously think that, but I know how much work my group put in, and I know the things that we tried to do, and I thought the result did not reflect those efforts. And some would say that's my failing as leader, or the fact that we got some big issues wrong and got punished by the electorate. Whatever you choose to draw those conclusions, but I think I'm proud of what we've done over the past 4 years, and I think we ran a very good positive campaign, and I don't think we've got the rewards we deserve, but that's life sometimes, isn't it?
Well, it is, and in life often effort. You don't get judged by effort, you get judged by results. And in political parties, it is often very arbitrary way things go. But you're also judged by what policies you're promising for the next ensuing period.
To be honest with you, I think the policies people promise are irrelevant. I mean, if you look at the policies that people have said in the past, we're going to protect the Green Belt, the Conservatives did nothing. We're going to build 3,000 new social homes. The Lib Dems did nothing, as opposed to us that apart from reviewing the local plan, which we thoroughly investigated, we did everything we said we were going to do. And, people that voted for us to do those things suddenly didn't vote for us to do them again. So,
okay, well,
it's a very fickle beast, politics.
Okay, well, we'll get on to some of that maybe. But during the campaign, GGG, along with R4GV and eventually Labour, were parties that Robin Horsley advised electors not to support in his widely viewed video, The Battle for Guildford. In your view, what effect did that video have on the election result?
What did I think? It's difficult. I mean, I think his ignorance has already had enough airtime, and I think it's past. Yes, it did have an effect. I think more the problem is the absolute mistrust of any politicians because of the behaviour of a lot of politicians in Westminster of all parties, that no one wants to trust anybody and trust that people want to do things for the right reasons. So anyone that produces sensational social media, it gets a big following because people want to believe the conspiracy theories and can't believe that people actually want to do things out of a public good. And that's really sad for society.
But he did latch onto something, didn't he? And that is that a lot of people didn't seem to be aware of the developments that were going ahead. Whether that was their fault for not paying attention or not, he did alert them, and a lot of them weren't happy, as you experienced, you said yourself, on the doorstep.
Yeah, but it's very easy. It's very easy to pick holes in things from a very simplistic argument. When you yourself, who's on the record as doesn't like the North Street development, at least you can see there are some positives, there are some negatives, and you can present a balanced argument. But to say that it was all doom and gloom, all horrendous, it was a secret, there was conspiracies, it's just so simplistic and basic. And it's just sad that people don't have the time to be properly educated in the facts and the balanced arguments of the schemes to be able to assess it correctly. And that's just life. I mean, when I was younger, I had no interest in local politics whatsoever. I wasn't aware of any consultations. But I think, I think said that probably the North Street consultation had been the most broad one you'd ever seen a developer do in Guildford, and still you're only struggling to reach probably less than half of the population. So You know, if people are busy and they're not interested, you know, it's very difficult to go and engage them unless you're going to knock on every door. And that's, you know, from time and money point of view, is almost impossible. So there's no, you know, councils are forever trying to find ways to really reach everybody, and especially reach the people they don't normally speak to, because the loudest voices are the ones that always respond, and they don't necessarily reflect the views of the majority. So I think, you know, everyone can endeavour to consult better. But I'm not really sure what more the council could have done, because, you know, you're a very objective observer, and I think you said that it was one of the biggest consultations, if not the biggest.
Well, I'm not sure I said precisely that, but there was certainly consultation. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but right, you know, then, you know, it's as I said, you know, but then you know, the council and the developer has to present things in a factual, balanced way. Social media is a circus; it's a free for all, and you can do what you like.
Okay, but it was effective.
Well, yeah, I believe so. I mean, you know, it reached people, and you know, people want to believe it. The sadder thing for me is not the content; it's the fact that people don't have the time or the inclination to actually research both sides of the story, and they'd rather believe someone who they don't know or have no idea about where they're coming from or what motivates them, and just believes that over, you know, people in relative authority.
Okay, well, so what were the specific innuendos and half-truths in the video that you and others have complained of?
Well, I was corrupt. That was a good one. You know, John Rigg was on the take. That's another good one. The latest video,
that wasn't said explicitly, was it?
I mean, as good as the latest.
So it was. What was it?
To be honest with you, Martin, I haven't actually watched all of the videos, so I couldn't tell you exactly what was said. It was just reported back to me. But the latest one I did watch, and the innuendo that it wasn't going to sell and it was going to be a load of social tenants that were going to do nothing for the high street was disgraceful. I mean, it's shocking. The sort of dog whistle politics behind them is horrible. And,
okay.
And you know, unfortunately, I think that's the one where he's jumped the shark, and everyone's realised he's a charlatan.
So, are you prepared to go on the record now and answer this direct question? Did you or do you have any pecuniary interest in the Debenhams or North Street development?
Absolutely none whatsoever.
And what about your other R4GV members?
None whatsoever.
But one was involved with the company. Nikki was involved. Sorry, I've forgotten her surname. Nikki
Ackley was a candidate.
Yes,
her company, where she is chair, she stood down for as chief executive. I think she's still chair. Was employed to do some PR.
Okay, and she went public with that when we asked.
Absolutely, from the beginning, and we, you know, and she was open with us that it may cause us issues at the election. You know, should she be a candidate? And we thought she has done so much for this borough in the past that she's a great candidate. And if people can't, you know, if people can't work in some professions and act as councillors, it's pretty sad.
But is a lesson I mean, wouldn't it have been wiser for her to declare that interest earlier?
She did as early as she could. Well, as soon as she was a candidate, she did.
Well, I'm only aware that she did it when we asked her about it.
No, not at all. Not
okay,
at all.
She declared it before that.
Yeah.
Okay, and don't you think that the council was in error by selecting Savills to act on their behalf on occasion, and that also St Edward it was a poor decision on St Edward to select Savills when they knew John Rigg had worked for them?
Why?
I mean, it wasn't John Rigg's fault.
If there's no conflict of interest, what's the problem? Loads of people have worked for loads of companies in the past. You can't suddenly start excluding people because someone once worked there. It's ridiculous. You procure people. You have a procurement. I mean, councillors do not get involved in procurement. It's purely for obvious reasons. So officers will go and procure. People will show interest, and they will assess them objectively and then give the work. We can't blacklist companies because someone once worked there.
Okay, so, but you don't think it was a mistake? You think it was okay for them to do that?
I think if Savills were objectively the best company to do that role and deliver the best advice for the council, and therefore the best advice for the residents, then Savills should be employed.
Okay, and I have checked with John Rigg in the past, and he has assured me that he had no role in the selection of Savills either
No,
way?
none at all. It's a procurement. I mean, councillors start getting involved in procurement. It's just,
Yeah,
I mean, you just
but,
can't, you just wouldn't want to, as a councillor,
but,
you just wouldn't want to do it
no,
because
I'm sorry, but I have to ask the obvious questions, as you understand, I'm sure.
yeah.
Right. So there's since the election, the parlous state of the borough council's finances have become more apparent and a major accounting error revealed. How much of the situation is the council's own fault, and what should have been done differently? Because some of this was done on your watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so you obviously have a backdrop of extreme financial pressure across the whole of all of local authorities. So, you know, stretching back to 2010, there's been enormous withdrawal of government support and an encouragement for councils to explore commercial revenue streams that are by definition risky. You know, councils have used that to more greater or lesser extent. You know, the extremes, borrowing billions to buy commercial property, which Guildford did not. Others have just cut service and have not gone down a risky route. So that's kind of the backdrop. Then you had the pandemic, which obviously hit reserves incredibly hard. And now you've got a huge inflationary boom. And the problem with inflation is that most of the council's costs are inflated, yet a lot of the revenue streams are set by government and they don't keep pace with inflation. So whereas we were able to, I think last year, raise an extra, I think it was under £400,000 in total out of council tax increases for the borough council, the increase in the total wage bill was over 3 million. Now there's not too many years you can fund a 2.6 million shortfall in revenue increase versus, you know, and obviously that's a little bit simplistic because we got a little bit more car park revenue, this, that, the other, but they all come with extra cost. So you know, there is a very real cost pressure and budget pressure. Now, Guildford had the added complication of changing budget systems and going through a big transformation during the pandemic. And to be honest, it was executed badly. Now you can talk about, you know, the context of the pandemic, the context of staff being seconded to more emergency service, this, that, and, you know, mistakes were made in the budget process and in the finance area, which, you know, in the extreme, £10 million was accounted for as a budget, as a reserve, when it should have been a provision.
It was a serious error, though, wasn't it?
A serious error, yeah. It was. I mean, it's a number that was put in the wrong column of a spreadsheet.
But
it hasn't directly impacted service. It's directly impacted the size of reserve and therefore the urgency with which you need to solve the budget problem.
Yeah, because you were getting a false picture.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And so what's happening about that? What is the accountability there?
The accountability. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, someone made a mistake.
Right. So how is that being made?
You would have to ask. You'd have to ask Julia McShane or Richard Lucas. I'm not party to any. I mean, it's amazing the lack of information you get as a backbench councillor compared to being an executive member or leader of the council. So well, I could not tell you. I could not tell you.
I can't ask Julia, I don't think, but I will try and find out. Thank you. Now, there's been an appeal for cross-party cooperation. But doesn't that compromise your duty to scrutinise the council? I know that you have in the debates. You know, you haven't been, you have raised criticisms of what some of the decisions or observations, at least. Do you think that by saying you're going to cooperate, if that's what you want to do, it does compromise your duty to scrutinise?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, my issues have been that the original report back in July was far too negative and painted half the picture because it didn't talk about assets and it conflated issues with the housing revenue account and the general fund, and unnecessarily caused a lot of stress amongst staff and residents. Also, you know, arguably it was a month later than it should have been. And then the next report, I was amazed that extra spending has still been occurring post-May, that the situation was worse. So, you know, having been relatively comfortable that we could trade our way or find a way through it, it's like the lack of urgency and the lack of decision making. I mean, why there wasn't a cost freeze back in May, I've got no idea, or a hiring freeze. Why we've waited until August, it's kind of beyond me. Now, I understand, you know, there's a need. We've got to be careful of the numbers, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But to be clear, these numbers were never going to suddenly swing to be a surplus this year. It was just a matter of how much it was a deficit. So to me, the conservative thing to do was back in May, say, right, there is a hiring freeze. We're not spending any money that's not in the budget, full stop, not wait until August. So, you know, that lack of decisiveness for me is a real issue.
And what is your judgment today? Has the situation improved or what?
Well, I mean, there's drip feeding of little cuts coming out, but there's not a coherent vision saying, right, we are, you know, for last time we did this, we kind of sent out a survey, all residents saying, look, what do you think is important? So for me, you need to have some vision about how you're going to restructure council service, not do little bits everywhere, because you're not going to be able to do that. So you may as well say, look, we're obviously, we're going to protect refuse, community services, but we may have to go away from art culture. I don't know, whatever the political decisions the Lib Dems are. But to me, cutting little bits everywhere is not going to lead you to a kind of coherent council at the end of it, because you'll just, you know, haircut everything and end up doing nothing well.
So when should we expect the announcements on the? I mean, we've had this leak about the baskets, but I mean, as you say, it's a small.
I have no idea. I don't know. Is it, Martin? There's a cross-party group that myself, Pat Oven, Philip Brooker, and David Bilbay sit on, and we're trying to be very constructive. You know, with ideas and do it. You know, and it's working pretty well. But we are not decision makers, and that is not a decision-making group. It is there to float ideas. It's there to float ideas. You know. Look at, you know, have we got assets we don't want, this, that, to sort of, you know, try and come to some sort of consensus. But it's not, as I said, it's like an advisory group. The decisions are going to be for full council or the executive.
Okay, right. Well, thank you for that. That's explained that situation. And now, your party was partly born out of the disquiet about the local plan. It was in 2019, obviously adopted just before you came to power, or came just before that election. Given the need to comply with national planning policy, looking back now, how would you have done it differently?
So, sorry, say that again, Martin.
Right. So there's a lot of disquiet about the local plan.
Yeah.
Some of that disquiet led to your election success as a party. So if you'd have been in power before 2019, what would you have done differently about the local plan? Because I mean, they have to comply with national policy, don't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem, the work on the town centre didn't start early enough. It was just a complete dereliction of duty, that no thought about delivering homes in the town centre was given early enough. And then the result was you had to go into the green belt because, you know, there'd been no master plan, no nothing in the town. You know, the quantum of development and the arguments about the buffer and this and that, we would have been a lot more aggressive, saying, look, if this is the housing target, you know, why do we need an extra 40%? You know, I don't know how hard they fought that. I have no idea.
Okay.
But I think the real issue was having no plan in the town centre, so no viable sites to be able to deliver apart from the ones that are in it. And that was we would have done very differently. But that work would have had to start a lot earlier than 2018. You know, this is. But
of course.
There's been huge failures in the town centre for years. I mean, building a low-rise surface car park on the Waitrose site. I mean, how is that an efficient use of land in the middle of a town centre? It's scandalous. I mean, it's just the lack of thought about how we're going to use what is a very scarce land, is a hugely scarce, expensive resource, and to just do another surface car park and a 3-story Waitrose on that site, shocking.
Okay, but so do you regret not reviewing the plan during the last 4 years?
I do not, because, you know, in hindsight and at the time, I knew the political thing to do was review the local plan immediately. However, in my judgment, and this is my personal judgment, and other people in the group voted other ways, so we had disagreement. You know, my personal view was the risks outweighed the potential benefits of an early review. That was my view, and I think our party was majority slightly that way, but it's pretty evenly split. politically, we should have reviewed it straight away and say, and to hell with the consequence. But I didn't come in this to do what was politically right. Came into this because I wanted to do what I thought was right, not what was politically right. And there's a very subtle difference.
Okay. Right. Now, you, I believe, are personally relaxed about building height. No, sorry, before we get on to that, what about infrastructure? Because there's lots of concern that the developments that are taking place in the borough are going ahead regardless of the infrastructure requirements. You know, I mean, we all know what they are. Increased NHS services, school places, public transport, road space and sewage, water supply, power supply capacity. Do you think that the lack of infrastructure should be sufficient to delay or prevent the development of more housing?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think you're personally relaxed about building height control, aren't you?
I don't think I'm relaxed. I think you need to show that height is harmful. I think it's different. I think that some areas 3 stories is incredibly harmful and some areas 10 stories isn't. You can't have some sort of blanket policy. It has to be in context of the actual site, and height in itself is not harmful. The harm comes from what it does to the surrounding environment.
Okay, but it's just that at one stage during a debate we had on the radio, I seem to remember you saying that you thought that ship had sailed.
What do you mean?
For Guildford. In other words, we've already got higher buildings in Guildford.
Yeah, I mean, I am on the record as saying some parts of Guildford are horrific, and they are not very nice environments, and some high buildings will improve. New high buildings will improve the area, and I stand by that. There are some areas that are beautiful, and anything over 3 stories will ruin them forever and should never be allowed. Okay. So, you know, I am relaxed about the height on North Street.
Now, you along with all the other your party, all the others during the election campaign said you were in favour of a zoned height control plan for Guildford. What's happened about that? I know that you're not in power.
As far as I'm concerned, nothing. I've heard absolutely nothing.
And so,
so my view, which I expressed at the time of the election, I believe everyone agreed with, was that there should be another height supplementary planning document that would be stronger or add further guidance that sits on the heights and views document that would help guide policy. That wouldn't be policy. It would be an SPD. And then as part of the town centre master plan or as part of the local plan review, you could introduce a policy. But in the short term, the only thing you can do is another SPD.
Okay, but there were calls for height control during the formulation of part 2 of the local plan.
Sorry?
There were calls for more height control measures in part 2 of the local plan.
Yeah.
Which was formulated during the Lib Dem R4 coalition.
Yeah.
So why didn't you get it done then?
So the decision, you know, the first year of the administration was a Lib Dem administration, and by that time the direction and some of the initial consultations for the DPDs were set. If we wanted to go back to the drawing board and start again, it would delay the whole local plan part 2 quite considerably. So again, judgment call, full council decision, not my decision alone, was to carry on with the local plan policies as they were, because there were a lot of beneficial policies, and to throw them all out on the basis of height. And the professional advice was it would be very difficult to have a prescriptive height limit without going to a site-by-site allocation in Guildford, and that was the professional advice.
But that's what you're proposing now, isn't it? Or something similar with a zoned height control.
Well, I mean, that would have to be properly researched. I mean, I'm sure that the professional advice would still say it's very difficult to do, but if that's the will, then that's what, you know, what the council will try and do.
Okay.
I still feel a proper heights and views SPD where you're actually defining harm rather than height is the way forward.
But an SPD is not as powerful as being actually.
But you cannot introduce a policy overnight. It has to go through a proper examination process.
And we should say an SPD is a supplementary planning document.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I'll. Right, like it or not, I know. I think we've covered that. So, what's the future now for R4GV? Do you think?
Well, the Horsley by-election.
Okay, that's
It's
the
the
next one.
future. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's obviously a, very traumatic. An election is a very traumatic time. There's a lot of effort, and we obviously need to have a look where we are. What happened, why it happened, and what we want to do going forward. It's a different group of people that are now councillors. And in 4 years' time, what's going to be the big story? We may have a different government. There may be more money around. There may not be. So for us, it's a period of reflection. We need to reconnect with the residents and find out what they want from a residents' party, and how that fits with the individuals in the party. So I think we need to go back out and talk to people, which is why the Horsley by-election is really important, to say, look, what do you want for the next 4 years? What are the big stories as you see them? Unfortunately, there is not a lot of money around in any of the local authorities. So there's it's going to be a pretty, I don't know, depressing is the wrong word. It's going to be a pretty challenging 3 or 4 years now ahead of us.
Okay, so I know it's not. I mean, that's a county council by-election, but I'm going to ask you, because often these things are not separated in voters' minds. So if I lived in Horsley and you knocked on my front door in your campaign, and I said, why should I vote for you? I thought you weren't going to put high-rise blocks into Guildford Town, and you've completely let me down. Why?
This is one of the surprises that we got wrong. So I think the problem is people that we have to build a certain number of houses. That's the law. Now, you either build them in the town or you build them in the Greenbelt. Now, we were surprised at the strength of feeling from some of our supporters in the Greenbelt about buildings in the town centre. It's like, well, if you don't like the buildings in the town centre, they're coming out to your village. So this is not so we were quite surprised at the depth of feeling from some of our supporters that live in the villages that didn't associate the fact that if we didn't build more homes in the town, they would be coming more into the Greenbelt in future plans. So that's something that we'd have to
You shouldn't
explain.
have been surprised, should you? You shouldn't have been surprised if you're in touch with your supporters.
Well, that's the thing. I think it was an assumption we made that to me didn't seem unreasonable, that we didn't articulate, and it obviously bit you in the arse.
Okay, but you in the house.
Well,
okay.
Not me. I'm still elected, but
but your party anyway.
Yeah,
okay.
No. But that's what I mean about in some ways as well. We were very much a victim of our success. We were a very small group. Pretty much the whole group got elected. We were suddenly in the leadership of the council, which is a full-time job, and that whole kind of party infrastructure where you're talking to your residents. You've got this, we didn't have that many people. Had, amazing support from Liz Hyland, from Howard Moss and Fiona. Then Fiona got elected. And it's like suddenly we that whole party side of the R4GV got neglected because we were all busy running the council.
Yeah, okay. Now, finally, what do you make of Julia McShane's apparent refusal to participate in our series of interviews?
I mean, everyone has different styles, Martin, and I can't possibly comment. I mean, I feel as
do you think it's accountable behaviour?
I don't, but people's views of accountability are different, aren't they? I mean, people on the left have a much more kind of communist style of joint accountability for everything, whereas I feel as leader of the council, you're accountable for every single decision, which is why it's such hard work. And I, one of the benefits of not being leader anymore is I'm sleeping a lot better because I felt every decision perfectly. Personally, it's like shutting toilets is not very nice, and it's something that there was no choice really. But I still took it incredibly serious, and I felt that I should come to you and to any other journalist or the BBC Surrey or whatever and explain why we're doing it, and at least show there is some sort of logic to even the hardest of decisions. And that's just my personal view of leadership. Julia has her own style, and we'll see if that works.
Well, Councillor Joss Bigmore, thank you very much for giving your time to the Guildford Dragon, and no doubt we'll be talking in due course.
Thanks, Martin.